Well, welcome to the 27th episode of Ideas and Lives, in which we interview people with compelling ideas and interesting lives. And we have a great example of that today, and a wonderful person that is a close colleague to my co-host and partner in crime here, Tzvi Bodie. So Tzvi, why don't you introduce them? And
okay, I'll take it from there. Our guest today, Theo Kocken, is, I can't even remember how many years ago we met, but I know that it was at a conference in the Netherlands where Theo came up to me either before or after the conference and said, I agree with you. And that was the start of a wonderful friendship, because, you know, there weren't a whole lot of people in the audience who did agree with me. And we may get specific later on and tell you what the issue was. But let me just say that Theo is a true entrepreneur in various aspects of his career, both as an academic, but primarily a practitioner in the area of risk management, and in particular as it applies to pension funds. And with that, I think what we should do is just ask our usual set of questions. Theo, we're gonna start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and the things that shaped your thinking and your entrepreneurial instincts.
Okay, thank you, Tzvi, for the introduction. Yeah, so my upbringing was, I'm not sure it was special, but I was raised in a family with 8 children, so 6 sisters and 1 brother, and I was number 7. So by the time I arrived, I don't think my mother and father had any energy left to raise me. So they let it go, that do whatever you want. So I was raised really, as they say, without any parental guidance. And I didn't get any rules, any strict things. When I was 6 years old, I had to travel to school alone, cross the city, highways. When I was 12, I had to go on holiday on my own. They said, go on holiday, make some money and spend your holiday with some friends. And
wait, what about your older sisters? Weren't they helping to raise you?
Not really. No,
really?
They were very kind. I have a very good relationship with them, but they went
They had their own thing.
Yeah, and they many of them were 8, 9, 10, 11 years older. So I was really, there was a 20-year gap from the youngest to the oldest in my family. And it wasn't bad. I mean, I'm exaggerating now maybe, but what the main thing is, what shaped me, I think, is that I couldn't stand any hierarchy or any rule-based thinking, and I was always questioning things. And so when I went into the army, then I found out that was a problem, because I couldn't stand any of they forced me to do things where I questioned them and said, if you can explain it to me, I'll do it. But he couldn't explain it to me because it was a rule. And he said, but it's a stupid rule. So I mean, maybe we should change the rule, which was not exactly what they intended to do, because they did it for 100 years. So that if they do it for 100 years, it's a good rule. And yeah, that really, then I found out that was difficult, and I decided that I wouldn't change. So I had to move from one station to the other. In those days, only 12 months, or they went to 5, 6 different military stations.
So the total military service, which was obligatory, but it was only 12 months?
Yeah, it was 14 actually, and 16 when I started, because I was an officer. but they took away my stripes because of insubordination. Then I was 14 months. And then I said, but what if I start to study something? I said, then you get 12 months. They said, okay. And I signed in for biology because some friends did biology, and I got 12 months. And I stopped biology after 2 months, I think, or 3 months, because it was just to get out of the army. And yeah, so then I moved on to study after the army, and I did 4 different studies. I changed all the time because I didn't really like it 100%. And when I didn't like it 100%, I decided to stop. I did biology, physics, business administration, and the last one, econometrics. And that one I really started to enjoy and to love. I finished the last 2, business administration and econometrics. And then I came, yeah, then I thought, wow, this is beautiful. It's mathematics. And yeah, so.
Was this in Amsterdam at the university?
No, it was in Tilburg.
Oh, Tilburg, okay.
No, where Theo Nijman, Lans Bovenberg, they were starting by that time because I was already old. It was my 4th study, and they were already professor, I think. They're still good friends. So that was my upbringing and I think my tour of finding what I really liked. And that econometrics really filled me with so much joy and happiness that I thought this is going to be the rest of my life. I'm going to do.
Yeah, there are not that many people who find joy and happiness in econometrics, but that's great. So now you launch your career, and where did you start?
So I started at the Bank for Dutch Municipalities in The Hague, a bank. Just accidental, because the mother of the CEO said to her son, you have to take this guy Theo because I think he's smart. So she overestimated me terribly, but
how did you meet the mother?
Well, actually, the mother was an old teacher retired, and she had a lot of connections with all the schools, and they sent people to her, and she sent everyone, many of them to me, to give them lessons, after school lessons, additional preparations for exams and things. And I made a lot of money with it, so it was good as a student because you don't have money. So and then she said, yeah, you're probably smart, and she sent me to her son, and that was my first job. That was really, with bond markets in the Netherlands and Germany and things like that, very, very stable environment. And then I moved to ING, and at ING,
we should say ING is a Dutch insurance company, very big international.
Bank. Yeah.
ING is a bank? I thought it was insurance.
No, that was Nationale-Nederlanden. It's part of ING in those days, not anymore. They were big insurance company, Nationale-Nederlanden, and but ING Group was a bank, and they were big in emerging markets. So at ING, I had to work. I did my modeling, and I loved to do the mathematics. Value at risk was actually just emerging. Didn't even exist as an official name. And I wrote a book about it, how you can measure risk. And then I found out that the way I was measuring risk and the way everyone was measuring risk didn't work in these emerging markets, because a lot of money would flow into these markets, and people become overconfident, and you saw that things would go bad, like inflation would go higher, and debt levels would go up, and everything underlying the economy looked bad. But everyone was euphoric about these markets, and so people invested in markets where I thought the risks were increasing, but the volatility was low, the correlations with other markets were low. So everyone said, this is safe. This is really, according to the models, this is very safe. I said, yeah, but according to our stress testing, our let's say system analysis, there's something really wrong. We're talking about many crises in the 90s that were taking place, and every time we didn't see them coming because these models were not alerting them. So I found out there was something like collective irrationality, which didn't exist in economics. I found out there were feedback loops. Things were not in equilibrium, but people reacted to the markets. They became euphoric. They invested more. Markets went up. People invested even more in these markets, and they only looked at the output, the surface, so to speak, of the markets, volatility, and all these measures that say this is risk. But to me, it wasn't risk. So I said to the Dutch Central Bank, we should stop using these models and we should replace them once in a while, not always, by let's say scenario thinking, which is something we did at ING. Then the risks are much bigger. And then the regulator said to me, no, this is a mathematical model. It's now worldwide, the basis of measurements, and you stick to your models, you're good at it, and shut up. So even not my own boss at the bank, but the regulator started to overrule me and say, well, you're warning for risks that are not there because you don't see them in the model, so they're not there. And then that was really shocking to me that we only relied on things, and we knew the world was not in equilibrium. The world was not always in equilibrium, not always following normal distributions, not at all. We knew it was more something like a power law, and the tail risks were 20 times bigger.
What years are we talking about? What years are we talking about?
This is ING. My ING time was 94 to 97. And then I moved to Rabobank. And then, of course, at ING in 97, 98, everything collapsed in the emerging markets, Asian crisis, Russian crisis. And then they lost so much money. And they said, wow, we lost like 10 times more than we expected. And then I thought, no, that's if we go back to the event scenarios and the scenario thinking, that was normal. But if we go back to the models, so they gradually started to believe their own models, or the regulatory models, and the whole world became a rule-based robot without any thinking anymore.
So they didn't account for what you would call bubbles that can burst.
Not at all. No, they didn't exist. Also not in many equilibrium theories, there are no bubbles. So there is an external shock, but a bubble is something endogenous. It's created from inside. Hyman Minsky, the story about how we become overconfident, and then
right.
And those things were not taken into account, indeed. Yeah.
Now, when you wrote your first book on value at risk,
yes, seriously, it was.
Was that was not a doctoral dissertation, was it?
No, it was just I was working at ING, and nobody wrote a book in those days. I think Jorion was the first book on value at risk in 97, but I wrote my book in 96. It was a Dutch book because there were no books, so I had to write something because nobody understood how to make these models. And I had a whole pile of paper, and everybody had to implement these models. So I made a lot of examples, and then somebody said, yeah, you can just as well put it into a book because this is a book. So I made a book out of it, and then all the other banks started to use it in the Netherlands.
Did it ever get translated into English?
I worked on it with Wiley, but then the guy at Wiley that was helping me to make this, to realize the project, left, and I was too busy, and I thought, well, it's fine. So too bad. On the one hand, on the other hand, I don't want to be seen as the one who wrote a book on value at risk.
Since you came to disbelieve the model, yes.
Exactly. Unfortunately, there was a chapter in the book where wrote that value at risk is very nice for normal circumstances, but it doesn't work in a crisis. So I call it an airbag that works at when you want to park your car at 15 miles an hour, but it doesn't work when you drive 150 miles an hour. And that's when
good image, very good image. Yes.
And that's the story of my life, and that's why I started Cardano Risk Management in 2000 to do all these things the way I wanted it, which was
Now tell the story about how you got that started.
Yeah, so I was working at Rabobank, and I was a good friend of Guus Boender, someone you know, from
yes,
Tech.
May he rest in peace.
Absolutely, and a very smart guy. And he said, you know, we do all this asset and liability modeling, but we need some pure risk management, the knowledge of derivatives and how you can hedge risks and how you can better use them in the context of long-term investing of risk management, like pension funds. And so that appealed to me, and I started a company, and he helped me a lot with clients and contacts, and so that was great.
He was the head of a different company called
Ortec, absolutely. And so what they did, they did a lot of modeling and long-term Monte Carlo simulations and things like that. And I focused more on the pure thinking of, but what are the consequences if these models are wrong? I'm not saying they're wrong, but for example, in asset liability, one of those religious things was mean reversion. And that's something that you can never prove, but people believed in it. So that's a religion. And it said that interest rates, if they were high, they would go back to something reverse, to something like 6-7%. If they were low, like very low, extremely low, like 4%, they would go up to 5-6% again. There was a high pressure to go up and a low probability that it would go to 4 or 3. And there was 0 probability it would ever go to 2%. So I came in with my reasoning, and then I said to these pension funds, we don't understand the world. The world is complex. It's full of feedback loops. It's full of, maybe people start to think differently. Maybe instead of when interest rates go down that we spend more, maybe we start to save more because we want to prepare for the future. And then you get, you replace the substitution effect for the income effect. The long-term income needs to be safe. So people start to, I don't know. I said, the only thing I know is that we don't know. So what happens if interest rates go to 2%? Now, for most people started to laugh. And in those days, it was 6 or 5.5 and 2%, out of the question. Said, yeah, but it happens over there in Japan and it might happen here. We don't know. Some pension funds started to be interested in just the scenario thinking. And so they started to think, okay, what's our biggest risk? Low interest rates. In the Holland, it was more nominal interest rates. In the UK, it's more inflation linked, because we work both in the Netherlands and the UK. And we started to hedge their interest rate risks with derivatives, with overlays. And we said, well, first we reduce the interest rate risk. And from there on, you can decide what kind of bet you want to take on interest rates.
This is Cardano's.
This is Cardano,
yeah.
This is what we started to do in 2000. And
how many people did you have at that time?
Well, at the first day I started on my own, and then in a year time we had something like 20 people, and we started to build because we didn't want to advise, but we also wanted to help pension funds to help them with the collateral management, with their everything that has to do with the negotiations about which kind of derivatives, what price, what kind of legal contracts do you need. So we helped them on everything, and so we became a kind of outsourcing for their complicated derivatives business. And
Theo, I just wanted Theo to clarify for some possible listeners, including this one, how you did manage to reduce the interest rate risk. What steps was Cardano taking to do that, or organizations?
So we looked at their balance sheet and we saw like 40-50 years of liabilities on the liability side, the obligation to repay, to pay a pension in the future.
Yeah.
And we looked at their asset side, and then we saw a lot of equity, some real estate, some bonds, which were 10 years old, maybe 10, 15, 20 years. So there was a big gap in sensitivity of interest rate sensitivity on the asset side and the liability side. And we would say, okay, what if we add some interest rate swaps? And then you look at what happens to the balance sheet when interest rate moves. And so you more or less hedge the balance sheet against interest rate risk by adding swaps, sometimes optional swaps, that's a swaption. We did also very complicated products like the combination of a swaption and which was linked to equity. So if equity would go down and interest rate would go down, then pension funds would really suffer. And then in those cases, those products would pay out a lot. But in other cases, they wouldn't, because they would only pay out when they really needed it. So it was relatively cheap and but very complicated. So I did it mostly in the early years with banks, because the pension funds of the banks were my best clients. People told me the banks will never be your clients, the pension funds, because they think they can do it themselves. But they didn't, because they liked it, because they knew what risk was. So they started to work with us, especially after the financial crisis. That helped a lot, of course. They knew even better what risk was. But some banks before the financial crisis, they worked with us already on reducing the risk, the interest rate risk, but also equity risk on their balance sheets. And so
were they interested in just their own investments, or also those to whom they loaned money?
No, they were interested in the because the pension fund indeed was on the balance sheet of the bank, or at least it not directly, but it would hit the bank indirectly in the Netherlands. It differs per country how it hits them, but they would have to pay a lot of extra money if things would collapse. So they were more in this case they were interested in their pension fund and the risk that it would put to the sponsor. I call it sponsor risk.
What was your relationship with Ortec at this time? Because Ortec was a giant company compared to Cardano.
Well, yeah, Guus helped me a lot with because they had all the clients in the Netherlands and in Europe, and he introduced me to all of them. For the rest, Ortec, the people at Ortec, they're very nice people, very smart, but they were doing different work, and we agreed that we sometimes disagreed. And I think Holland was very advanced in asset liability modeling, thanks to Ortec, also worldwide. And I think asset liability modeling can help a lot. But when I talked about that mean reversion is a religion, then Guus said, yes, I agree, but they want it in the system because they just take out of our models what they want to believe. You know, that's always with, I think in general, in psychology, first you have a feeling, and then you want to find the models around it, the theories that confirm your feelings.
Right, confirmation bias, right?
Confirmation bias. So Ortec was almost abused sometimes for confirmation bias, and of course they had almost 100% of the market. We only had the 10-20% of people who really wanted to do their hedging, which were also their clients. So we didn't collide, not at all. We also didn't work together because they wanted to be independent and we wanted to be independent. So yeah, that went very well.
Now, all this time, you did not have any graduate degree in finance or economics, correct?
No, I did my master's in econometrics, and all this time is exaggerated, but in 2005, Jean Freins from ABP in those days, he retired, one of the biggest pension funds in the world. He retired, he was the CIO. And at his retirement reception from ABP, he came to me and he said, you should become a professor. And we always disagreed. That was nice because we always disagreed about interest rate hedging and things. But he said, yeah, you have your own very clear ideas about how to deal with risks. You should become a professor. I said, I don't even have a PhD. And then he said, well, then you get a PhD. I just bundled I had a lot of publications already. And I wrote the books and things and chapters in books. So I just bundled things together. And I wrote something around pension contracts, defined benefit. I called it Curious Contracts. You remember it maybe, Svi?
I do. That's when we met.
Yeah, exactly. That's around when we met. And that's 2006. And it said, well, I'm curious what will happen if interest rates will go down, longevity will go up, and all these things we don't know. But the contracts are not resistant, are not sustainable in case of a very uncertain environment. And I didn't know that 3 years later, everything came out. I would never have guessed that everything went south, everything went wrong at the same time for pension funds. So most DB pension funds in the UK closed. In the Netherlands, many started to close. And yeah, that was, I never forecast anything because I didn't know. I just said this, we have fundamental uncertainty. And if these things happen, we will not survive. And people said, what do you mean? What do you mean underfunded pension funds in the Netherlands? That's impossible. Yeah. They couldn't even imagine that the pension funds would go from 160 funded ratio to 120%. That was already unimaginable. So my point in that's, I think the line, the thing in my life, the red line is that people lack imagination. And every crisis, that's what some people say, is the core of every crisis is lack of imagination. And that's it. And people could imagine these things happening, took actions, or were much better prepared and much more adaptive. And that's what gradually became my hobby of complexity thinking, complexity theory, how fundamentally uncertain the world is. And then you do different risk management. You apply different techniques. You don't apply normal distributions, which are this smooth, but you apply broad scenarios, and you start to think, okay, these scenarios will never happen. We don't know which one will happen. But what do you do if they happen? How can you be prepared if things go that direction? What are the signals that tell you, now I have to do hedging here, now I have to be proactive here, and not be, instead of being surprised and say, wow, this is a once in a million year event. I saw at least 10 once in a 10 million year events in my 30-year career. So, and I don't look like a dinosaur, I hope. But, yeah.
Now,
What do you think the barrier is to people not really embedding in their heart and mind the full nature of risks in the world that can affect their own financial situation?
I think it's a combination of what we call ambiguity aversion. People are very ambiguous against uncertainty. So they want to move it from uncertainty into probabilities, but many probabilities we just don't know, certainly not
Right.
But we want to claim we know them. So we make it like, we know the probability distributions of the height of people, but not of financial markets, but we think we do. We want to believe.
well, but there's the problem of hindsight bias.
Absolutely.
When you look at what people tend to think after the fact, that it was much more predictable than it was.
Absolutely. So there are many biases that add to it, like hindsight bias. I remember that for Boom Bust Boom, that Daniel Kahneman said.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Tell us about that, because that started out as something we were going to do together, but he took a lot of the money that he had made in Cardano, and he hired Monty Python's producer. Go tell them the story.
Yeah, so we were talking about, Svi and I were talking about writing, I think, a children's book for her, and maybe we should still do it. We should still do it. And so, but I accidentally ran into Terry Jones from Monty Python, and those are my heroes. If I have one hero or a group of heroes, it's not in finance, but it's in absurdism, and that's called Monty Python. So I ran into Terry via Keith Ambach's here in Canada, and he had a friend who was an oncologist, and that oncologist introduced me to Terry, and we made a small film in 29. We called it Risky Business in the Business of Risk. That was just absurdism. But in 2012, I wrote a book, Endogenous Instability, about Hyman Minsky, a small booklet. It was actually my speech, my inaugural speech. And
yes, this is when he got an academic appointment. So he got his PhD, and then later was appointed a professor at
the VU, yeah.
Yes.
So then I was appointed professor. I gave a speech. I think you were there, Svi. You also.
I was there for it. Yes.
Thank you. It was a very nice day, and I showed that speech to Terry, and he said it's amazing that economists don't take financial or human behavior into account. That they don't accept that there are feedback loops, and they go from one crisis to the other. So we made a film about financial crisis called Boom Bust Boom, and how things repeat time after time again, the same way, and including Sri Bodhi in the film. And there was a beautiful.
We should say the film is available on the internet.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it is available. It depends per country, because we sold it to Netflix and to iTunes in different countries. So I don't know where it is available exactly. It's available on the website of Cardano, but then you have to be in the UK or in the Netherlands. But if people really can't find it, they have to send me or you an email, and I'll give them a link where they get a password. But it's with puppets, it's with animations. And that's what I liked about, you can write articles, whatever you want. They reach a few people. Either they reach the people who agree with you already, and the people who don't agree with you won't read it. So that's what academics do. And polarization in academics is big, because I screened this film at the VU, at my own university, and the film said at the end of students, and they say, we don't think that our education is properly preparing us for the real life, because they don't even teach us what happened in 2008 in the financial crisis. We can't answer that question, what happened. And then I screened the film in Amsterdam, and my own professors, some of them, walked out of the room, and they were angry, and they said, you're making ridicule of our profession. And they went to the big boss, the rector, Magnificus, and the rector said, what's the problem? They said, well, Theo is making students very uncomfortable, and so they don't know what to do anymore. And then the rector said, students being uncomfortable is the essence of science. So I'm still professor for the time being.
That was a wise man.
That was a wise man, yes. It was a very good man. Frank van der Dijk.
And he kept his job?
One of the few low risk decisions.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's the
So
story.
what did you teach?
Sorry?
What do you teach, or did you?
Officially, I'm a professor in risk management for for institutional investors. But what I'm teaching today, mostly, both to bachelor and master and postgraduates, is complexity economics. So I teach them how we as humans, if you take human behavior into account, you get all kinds of complicated reactions. We react to each other, institutions react to each other. They are connected to each other. There are networks or in society. And if you take a network and you propagate a shock into that network, you get a totally different result than if you look at financial institutions, for example, as single institutions, and you add all the risks of all the institutions together. So you have to look at how institutions are connected to understand what the risks is in the system. So you can reduce the risk of one institution, like we're doing with banks. You reduce risk by more and more rules. The risk that one bank will collapse will reduce. You ask them to put more more equity into the bank and those kind of things. But they all become homogeneous. They all become the same. They close their trading desks. There is less liquidity in the markets. There is more systematic risk, because if one collapses now, they all have the same balance sheet. They have the same exit strategy. So sometimes reducing risk on a micro level is not the same as reducing risk on a macro level. And those kind of things I try to teach. It goes all the way back. Sri asked me, what do you really like as books? And then I think if you really go back to the 60s and the 70s, you got the book Micro Motives, Macro Behavior of Thomas Schelling. And Schelling was really one of those guys who was actually at the beginning of understanding how reacting to each other leads to unstable outcomes.
Yeah.
And it should be said, he did get a Nobel Prize in economics for the
absolutely. That's
well
good.
deserved.
Actually, Nobel Prize winners are sometimes from the, let's say, more classical equilibrium thinkers, but they also have the the Robert Shillers and the other more behavioral finance, and Herbert Simon, of course, was a Nobel Prize winner. And
he was one of the early, I count him as one of the pioneers in behavioral.
Absolutely,
economics.
absolutely. I think
Now,
Herbert Simon was. Sorry,
how
what?
did your econometrics training, if at all, influence your orientations in finance?
Actually, in derivatives, it worked. It helped me a lot. Like Svi's friend, Bob Merton, is, of course, a guy who invented the arbitrage pricing theory and the valuation of derivatives. We use that a lot, of course, in Cardano to price risks, but not to understand risks, to understand things that are. So it helped me on the one hand, and it hindered me on the other hand, because I had to tell people, don't take it too serious when it comes to the future, when it comes to being imaginative. Then you need other techniques than the techniques you learn at econometrics. And that's what I'm teaching now. I'm even teaching things like scenario thinking and pre-mortem, and how do you do these kind of things? How do you create worldviews? I try to teach that to students. And even some of my colleagues say, you know, you're an econometrician, this is not science. And I said, this is science. There is so much science about how scenario thinking makes you think, makes you use your brain better and use things from your knowledge that are hidden when you only work in this very narrow domain. So I became more a psychologist using a bit of econometrics than anything else.
Now, Cardano has grown into a fairly substantial company, right? How many employees they have now?
Cardano now has, I think, 500 almost. When I left Cardano last year, because we had 400 people, and my limit was actually, when I was young, in 2000, I said maybe 50 is the limit. And then we actually, to be honest, some people say that I said 20, but after 20, I said 50. After 50, I said 100. But at some point, it really didn't work for me anymore. Then you get compliance, you get IT. You know, they showed me the IT infrastructure of Cardano. I thought, my God, this is my company. I have to leave. But there are a lot of people better at running a big company and running projects and running, let's say, growing a company from this early stage to the next. And they're doing a good job now. So yeah, my best friend Harold Naus is running Cardano in the Netherlands. He's also CFO of the group. And I moved to Cardano Development, which is a foundation that I founded in 2007. And together with some other guys from development banks. And that's what I'm doing now, working in for a better financial infrastructure in developing countries, hedging local currency risks. So that's my my new.
Are you working with any governments of developing countries?
Yes, we work with almost, for example, a few weeks ago, we did a better money market collateral system in Uganda. So we were helping the government and the regulators to implement a kind of multilateral clearing system. And we help them, and sometimes we provide the tools as well. And so it's a lot of, has to do with financial inclusion. We do saving projects in South Africa, and I also did something in Ghana.
Sounds a lot like what the World Bank tries to do.
The IFC, the World Bank, is part of all these initiatives. So the World Bank, so in 2007, we started TCX, which is called the currency exchange. And we did that with IFC, with all the development banks in the world, with the African Development Bank, the Inter-American.
What is the IFS? What is the IFC?
IFC is the, let's say, the banking side of the World Bank. They have the private sector initiatives and things like that. So, and the World Bank itself is more focused on countries, and so IFC is part of the World Bank, and they're the development bank within the World Bank.
And your company, the foundation, is a non-profit entity?
Yeah, because what happened is we set up TCX. So, and that what that company does is they hedge currencies in countries that have no markets, no currency markets. So, for example, when a development finance institute, a DFI as we call it, wants to invest in Ghana, they give them a loan normally in dollars, in US dollars or in euros. But that's very detrimental to the side, to the borrower, because if their economy collapses, their economy is doing bad, but they have to repay maybe 3, 4, 5 times more because the dollar went up. If their currency collapses 80%, they have to repay 5 times more. So that's always what we call the original sin, and that's very bad for people to borrow in hard currencies.
Well, that's what happened in the collapse in 1998, the crisis
Exactly.
of 1998.
That's why we want to set this up.
I think
And we did it.
I think it's happened in several crashes or difficulties, not necessarily for lots of countries, but where, as Dale Gray put it, the risks and benefits are not symmetric, that the downward side has far more
Absolutely.
negative consequences than the upward side has positive consequences, because of the nearness to bankruptcy, the rush to the exit, and so on. And that the long holding, for them to hold dollars, for them to owe dollars, I guess, is where a lot of these risks happen. But countries are learning that, correct, at this point?
Yeah, but they're learning it, but there is no market. So the DFIs, what the development finance banks, they cannot borrow or they cannot lend money in local currency if they cannot hedge themselves, because then they have all the risk. So they went by borrowing. If people borrow locally in local currencies, the default risk gets lower because of you're not sensitive to currency risk anymore. But then the currency risk is on the bank of the balance sheet of those DFIs. But what we did is we said, you know what, DFIs, if you combine all your risks together in one pool, and we call that TCX fund, and you put every bank in the world will put a few $100 million of equity into that fund. What you do is every time you give a loan in the local currency and you hedge yourself into that fund. But one bank, for example, in Africa is exposed to Eastern Africa, to Kenyan shilling. Another bank like EBRD in Europe, they are exposed to the middle of Europe and the Russian region. They never collapse at the same time. And this is exactly what we tested a lot with risk management models and with stress testing and with history. And we said, if we do this, you can reduce your default risk of your own, of your clients a lot. And you can hedge your currency risk. And the only risk that remains is that whole fund will lose, in the worst case, maybe 5, 10, 15%, but it will not ruin your balance sheet. And you only have a small stake in that fund. So and I thought this will never work. I told these guys at the development bank in the Netherlands, FMO, I said, this will never work, but I want to help. And so we helped from Cardano's perspective. It worked. Suddenly all the development banks started to work together. It's now something like a 7 billion fund that gives a lot of loans in more than 60, 70 different local currencies that otherwise would not have access to local borrowing. And then FMO, we set it up, said, why don't you take it, Cardano, because you're good at managing these kind of small companies. And I thought, well, there's so much government money in these funds, and so much sponsoring money going into it, that we decided to make a foundation of it, set it apart, and never make profits out of government money. And so that's why we started the foundation, a charity. It's now even a charity where you can deposit money, or you can.
Well, it's not a charity; it's a non-profit.
Yeah, it's really also a charity.
It is.
Yeah, so it's what we call in Holland, it's for the general use, the general purpose. It has a benefit for society. So if you give money to the charity, you can subtract it from your tax. So it has to fulfill all kind of really, it's more than not for profit.
Now, does the United States government or any
USAID,
entity?
yeah, USAID,
Yes.
they work a lot with us on many projects, and especially
So it's mostly in Africa.
Africa, Southeast Asia, Middle America, South America, and the countries around Russia. And so now Chechnya and those kind of countries, they got a lot of trouble, of course, with their currencies today. And we have many hedges in these countries, and so these people who got the local borrowing now can repay in the local currency, which is a lot better than, of course, than the US dollar.
Right. So the yeah, I imagine that you're affected by what's going on in Russia and Ukraine.
Absolutely, but that's also the good thing. So the fund is now suffering, but when it suffers, it means that it's helping a lot of people, the clients behind the fund. It's like an insurance company that has to repay because there is a hurricane, but the hurricane repayments help a lot of people to get repaid. So that's exactly why we're there. And other countries are not suffering, like in Africa, nothing is happening when maybe in the long term with inflation, of course, but
so you're making use of the diversification principle across countries, basically.
Very exactly, but real diversification, and not what people sometimes think. Oh, if I have a stock of equity in the US market, in the S&P, that's diversification. But if the market goes down, everything
goes down.
It goes down. But in these countries, we already had several big crisis since 2007. It's now 15 years, and every time it was only in one region, so it worked perfectly well.
So do the defined benefit plans resist a little bit in the sense that they're concerned that their returns will be insufficient to pay their obligations?
Well,
in other words, they seem to, at least in the United States, many seem to go on hope. And Svi knows more about this than I do, but
it's a disgrace in the United States. These defined benefit funds, the state pension funds, are so much underfunded, but they're hiding it because they use this expected return kind of calculations.
Right. The accounting is fishy, shall we say, put it mildly. But I doubt that that's
fraudulent, maybe better words.
But I doubt that the institutions you're dealing with in your current foundation are pension funds. That maybe they're sovereign wealth funds.
No, yeah. So Cardano Development as a foundation doesn't have much to do with pension funds. Although we have now 10 initiatives on the Cardano Development. Checks was the first one. We recently launched an initiative called ILX, and what they do is all the development banks give loans to all these frontier markets, but the pension funds usually don't know how to invest in these markets, so they're very opaque to them and very difficult to invest in. And they now are teaming up with the DFIs in this fund. If a DFI does a loan, then the DFI the development bank did a very good screening process and risk management testing. If they give a loan, and these loans are often repaid, they have a very good, let's say, performance track record, then the pension funds will co-invest with the DFIs. And that's the fund we set up recently, ILX, under Cardano Development. And that's where the pension fund world and APG, so ABP, the big pension fund, was the first one to invest. So credits to them. I used to fight with them 20 years ago, but I don't fight with them anymore.
Right, strange bedfellows, right? But the pension funds you're talking about are in the developed countries like the Netherlands, and they are investing in this pool, which is making loans to developing countries.
Absolutely. But we also try to create pension funds in these developing countries.
Oh, you do?
Yes, like and saving vehicles in for people who hardly have any access to banks or asset managers in South Africa, in Ghana, with very simple new technologies, not simple, but simple to use, and working with the government as well. And because if you create pension funds in these countries, that's one of the big solutions to local currency finance, because if they start to save more money, then they have money for their governments to an infrastructure product to invest
and so it's an alternative to having sovereign wealth funds, let's say.
Exactly. So that's the big dream for me in the future to support more saving projects in especially Africa, because to me Africa will be growing from 1.2 billion people to 4 billion people. It's the biggest problem we have on earth to make them better integrated in the financial system, in every climate change, of course, that we have to focus so much attention to Africa. But if you ask investors, they say, yeah, but Africa is dangerous. The governments are corrupt, and that's all true, but we have to. So we have to find ways to.
Here's another question, which is very much motivated by a proposal that Bob Merton and I put forward years ago, and that's the notion of creating international pension swaps that invest in equities. So, diversifying across stock markets in these developing countries.
That's a very good idea, but the problem is that often the investors here are afraid of these markets.
Right.
But that's a real catch-22 kind of thing, that you how can you ever make these countries grow better if you don't want to invest in them because you're afraid of them? And we have to, and that's why I love the pension funds in Europe and in America and everywhere, but I'm focusing now on these frontier markets the rest of my life, because it's my passion now to
it's a tremendous challenge, yes. And that's fantastic. So you've come a long way as an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. From creating a successful profit-making company. Did you cash out your own investment in Cardano?
Yes. So I don't need to really work hard for money anymore, so I can spend my money on these projects a bit, but I have to be careful, of course.
Of course. Yeah. You don't want
if you put too much in, you better hedge it.
Exactly.
Right. I should say before we say goodbye to you that my co-host Bob Lerman has more siblings than you do.
He does. How many?
Yeah, but boys, 9 boys and 1 girl.
Okay.
And we did take some care of each other, but it does make you a bit more independent, I think, because you have to do a lot of things on your own. Even I was 4th oldest, but you do have to do more things on your own, and that I think we sometimes, make little children too dependent and too infantile.
Well, yeah, but the big difference is that there is a Lerman family business that everybody has a stake in. I don't know, is there a Kocken family business?
Not at all. No, we're quite different.
But I'm talking about growing up and just
of course,
playing ball on your own and finding your own way.
Well, Theo is into all sorts of extreme sports, right, Theo?
Extreme sports.
Well, I know that you travel great distances on your vacations.
Yeah, we did extreme things like running to Paris with relay teams and things like that.
There you go.
But I'm not really, I mean, I just want to stay healthy. I'm not extreme. I'm not I don't do that too often.
No, you don't do hang gliding or that.
Oh yeah, I do that. I do hang gliding.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, I consider that an extreme sport.
Well, at our age.
But it's
yes.
safe. If you know how to do it, then it's very safe.
Right.
Okay,
So-
well, we're gonna hedge our bets on that, so.
I agree with you, Bob, that with I have two children, and yeah, they are raised totally different than I was raised. In my time, you just were left to your own devices and.
Yeah, my kids too were a little too dependent, but you know,
Yeah,
that's,
but I'm not sure if it's bad. It's just what it is, and
right.
you
They have
cherish it.
advantages and disadvantages. You know, can get help through difficult times, but well,
I think we
let me
have
just
reached
ask,
the end. Yeah.
What's, you know, we have a couple more minutes. You know, what's, can you give us a sort of a short notion of what the feeling is in the Netherlands in the aftermath of the Russian invasion?
Yeah, well, mixed. Of course, we get a lot of refugees, and we're very sympathetic to them, and it's a very, let's say, open. We're open arms in receiving them. There are people who really think a nuclear war may happen. There are some people are really almost depressed that they think this is not gonna. This guy is so in his last stage of his life that he might use the trigger. Not many people, but I heard some people really thought this is the end game that might happen. And as a risk manager, I would say I don't think the expectations are that will happen, but in the way that we deal with it, I would love to have somebody like Thomas Schelling or Herman Kahn, the real thinkers, and help Biden not to escalate this conflict. But also here in Europe, we're escalating it a little bit, like telling Ukraine, oh, you can join the European Union now. Yeah, no, that's fine, but we have to understand the whole history of Russia and Ukraine and be a little bit more, maybe not
Yeah, it
so
might
aggressive.
be better to wait till the war's over. But
Exactly.
yeah, Schelling was particularly interested in the non-use of nuclear weapons because when he was working at RAND Corporation in the late 40s, early 50s, he said everybody thought that certainly over the next 40 years, somebody would use a nuclear weapon in conflict. And it didn't happen. And he's tried to he had tried to explain it a bit, but it's still up in the air. And
yeah, so we might think that we're safe now, but what Nassim Taleb said that we shouldn't mix up evidence of absence with absence of evidence. There is no evidence that there is a nuclear war because it never happened, but it doesn't mean that we now proved that, okay, so it won't happen because we proved it. No, we never proved it won't happen.
right.
And so it's very tricky. And this guy sitting over there in Russia is in a position that I think none of the other leaders was in the past. And he's losing, and people are losing and have one, you're losing, you're somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you have one gun in your pocket. Are you going to use it or not? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Well,
On that happy note.
Yeah.
Let's go out with an optimistic scenario.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The war is concluded, and within the next month, and Russia takes over the eastern part of the Ukraine in some fashion, and we get back to peaceful state. the
Absolutely.
world.
And Cardano Development will solve all the problems in the developing countries. Ta-da!
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
good.
Well, you're on your way doing that. I do remember books, dating back to the 60s on the important role of finance and development. And it's good to see that you're making the practice of it on a sound basis, so that the real economy can build more effectively.
And now you're working on another film, aren't you?
I finished another film, yeah. It's called Your 100-Year Life, about how we grow older worldwide, but we don't actively help elderly people to pursue an active elderly life. So what your guys are doing, everyone should be doing, but it's not happening. People at 65 are often dumped, or 66 or 67, and we don't have any notion of dealing in a fair way with elderly people. They get small social circles, they lose the purpose in life. So it's just bad, the way we deal with retirement. We need pension funds, but it doesn't mean that we need retirement the way we do it now.
Right. Refire, don't retire.
Exactly.
Now, can we get access to this film?
Yeah, it's not yet officially in premiere, but I'll send you the link and the password. And
Great. We'll post it on our website as well.
Absolutely. Okay, good.
Well, thank you again, Theo. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And it's
nice.
wonderful to hear how all your efforts have panned out. It must give you a great sense of satisfaction to have made these contributions. And as Zvi and I say,
Sei gesund.
Sei gesund, be well.
Mazel tov.
There we go. Bye-bye.
There we go.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.